How can you hear the sea? Simply by putting a shell to your ear. The effect is amazing, but it's not the sea you're listening to at all. It's the sound of your own blood circulating. It's just like the real thing.
Fred, it is the real thing.
Pardon?
Because today, How goes to the seaside. Fred, we're in Brighton.
Yes!
Let's go for a paddle.
Yes! Fantastic!
Lovely, Fred.
Let's go for a swim.
Oh, Fred.
What?
Look.
What?
Oh, the trainers.
My shoes! Ah! You fool!
Not my fault.
How washed up are your trainers?
Do you mean trainers as in sports shoes?
Exactly, Fred. Now, for this How, we need to study the oceans, and in particular, the North Pacific. Now, in all of the oceans, there are huge currents swirling around. They're a little like rivers within the oceans themselves. And scientists have tried to study these currents for quite some time, but because of the vast areas involved, they find it very difficult. Until May 1990, that was, because then they had a stroke of luck. There was a container ship travelling around the Pacific with over 30,000 pairs of trainers on board. Now, the trainers fell into the ocean and got swirled up in the currents of the North Pacific. Now, eventually, sometime later, over 1,300 of them landed on the west coast of America. Now, people walking along the beaches picked them up, took them home, dried them off, dusted them down and thought, aha, I've only got one. Where's the other part of the pair? Now, what they started to do was put adverts in local newspapers, and that is when two scientists spotted the adverts. Now, these scientists were working at the National Marine Fisheries Service and contacted the beachcombers. And with the information that those people were able to give them, they then could fine-tune a computer program that they'd been trying to build for quite some time to show exactly how the currents moved within the ocean. Well, there was another piece of luck for the scientists too, because around about 2 years later, 30,000 plastic ducks and other bath toys fell into the ocean as well. Now, over 400 of them have landed in Alaska to date, but it may take up to 5 or 6 years for them to land on the shores of Japan.
God, I tell you, these stones are hard, Gareth. Gareth?
Well, you shouldn't let our trainers get lost out to sea, Fred.
I tell you what, getting changed in these things is impossible. I tell you what, when I was a lad, getting changed at the seaside really wasn't that difficult. Oh!
How did our forefathers preserve their modesty? 200 years ago, you see, sea bathing was regarded as extremely healthy, rather like spa bathing is now. And in those days, men were on one end of the beach, women were on the other.
Quite right,
Never the
too.
twain would meet.
Yes.
In those days, too, the standard bathing costume looked like this.
There's nothing
You
there.
haven't got anything.
Exactly. Nothing there. Well, they were miles apart. They never saw each other. It didn't matter. However, over the next 100 years, bathing costumes became a little bit less revealing. So, 100 years later, your average standard women's cosy would look like this.
Oh, that's not very nice.
Just an old sack, Fred.
But extremely modest. However, if you'd just arrived from Mars, you wouldn't have known any of this. How come? Let me explain. Let's go back to the seaside in the old days. Well, this is my bathing hut. It's a bit like a sort of mobile beach hut, and you'd climb into it in the dry at the top of the beach. You'd take your clothes off until you were completely naked. Then the machine would be pulled down to the water's edge, and you'd make a discreet entrance into the water. Oh! And that's honestly how they preserved their modesty. Of course, not everyone was brave like me, and for reluctant bathers, they employed formidable women called dippers.
Mr. Jones, will you stop being such a baby? Now get in the water.
Oh, no, I really don't think I should.
Yes, I really do think you should. It's absolutely
And that was the
lovely.
dipper's
I've
job,
got
actually,
lights on it
to
every
persuade
morning.
reluctant bathers to get in the water. Come on in, Gareth. The water's lovely, old boy.
Oh, it's quite refreshing.
Very refreshing. And that's how our forefathers preserved their modesty.
Oh, Fred, stop kicking me.
I didn't kick you.
God, thanks for rescuing me, mate. That pretend sea was nearly as cold as the real thing.
Fancy a swap?
Yes.
One size fits all, eh, Fred? How did we originate the phrase, here's one I made earlier?
I thought I invented that.
You did? You would have thought so. In fact, a lot of people believe that that came from children's television.
His arms or legs, I mentioned, he uses them to pull the shell apart, slowly but surely. And when he's done that, he turns his stomach inside out and then begins to digest the contents of the shell. And then, when he's satisfied, he turns his stomach back outside in.
Lovely.
And you're sweet, sir?
Oh, thank you. Very nice yourself.
Gruesome, but true, because that is how a starfish fishes.
Hey, look at this telescope.
Oh, Fred, have you got a tissue?
Yes, have you got a coin, though, for this telescope? Fantastic, thank you.
Oh, yes. How did Nelson improve the manners of his officers? You see, midshipmen were very junior members of the officer class, but nonetheless they were expected to behave like gentlemen, even though they took some encouraging to do so. Bit of acting now, slipping into part, but no prizes for guessing who I am.
And Fred, who are you supposed to be?
I'm Nelson, of course.
He only had one arm, Freddie.
Sorry,
Other arm.
sorry.
He was blind in that eye.
I thought I couldn't see. Look, do you mind if I get on with this, Hal? Thought Nelson, let's see how my midshipmen are looking. Oh, no. Midshipman Jones is hanging around again with his hands in his pockets. I don't mind him hanging around. I just wish he wouldn't look as though he was hanging around. What can I do about this? And then a brainwave. Mr. Vorderman, chop off that man's pockets immediately, please. That'll stop him hanging around. Oh, no! This is awful. The man's habits are going from bad to worse. Now he's using his sleeve as a handkerchief. This is terrible. Thought Nelson, brainwave. Mr. Vorderman, put some buttons on that man's sleeves immediately. That'll stop his dirty habits. And it must have worked, you see, because midshipmen wore buttons on their sleeves up until 20 years ago. And to this day, they're still known as snotties. So that's how Nelson improved the manners of his officers. It may not have been my greatest military achievement, but at least I won the Battle of Waterloo.
Fred.
Trafalgar. Freddie.
Don't be so picky.
Fred, my feet are killing me. Can we go back to the pier?
Yeah, why don't we catch a train?
Yeah, we can't. There's no train stop here.
Listen, I know all there is to know about stopping trains. How can a fly stop a train?
It can't possibly do that, Fred, because
No.
it's only little and the train's big.
Yeah, impossible. It's a mass differential. A train would hit a fly and just flatten it.
So you say 10p says a fly can't stop a
Definitely
train?
easiest 10p ever.
Yeah.
Okay.
This one.
Okay, picture the scene.
Yeah.
Fly buzzing along a railway track in this direction. Express train zooming along a railway track in this direction. Zap. Train wipes up fly without so much as a by your leave.
That's what
Yeah,
we said.
well, it didn't stop
End
it,
of
did it?
story. Case dismissed.
Yeah.
Yeah, we get our 10p's back.
Or is it?
Oh.
Because I put it to you, members of the jury, that my client, the fly, in fact stopped the train, albeit for the briefest moment in time, but stopped that train in its tracks. Let me elucidate. There are three crucial stages here. Stage one, my client, the fly, travelling along the railway track in this direction. Stage three, my client, the fly, travelling along the railway track in this direction, attached to the front of the train.
Yeah.
What's stage
Definitely.
2 then?
Stage two, My client, the fly, travelling neither in this direction nor in that direction.
Yeah.
In other words, my client, the
It
fly,
stopped.
had stopped in order
Yes,
to change
yes.
direction.
Yeah,
And at
yeah,
the precise moment he became attached to the front of the train
Yeah.
to change direction, he stopped. Therefore, if he stopped, then the train must also
Because they're
have
attached to
stopped,
each other.
Because they're attached to each other.
Yeah.
That is how a fly
That
stops
is
a train.
amazing,
Brilliant.
Fred. That really is
Complete
amazing.
and utter nonsense, of course.
Here's an even more unlikely train how for you, Fred. How can a dead man stop a train?
Dead man can't stop a train, Gareth. Dead man can't do anything.
Oh, I shall prove to you that a dead man can stop a train. We're riding here on Volks Railway, which is Britain's first electric railway, right here on the seafront in Brighton. And our driver, Ray, is operating the train by holding that lever there. Now, every time he moves that lever, there are 4 positions, it removes a resistor from the electrical circuit, which allows more power to go to the electric motors, so the train speeds up. But what would happen if Ray was suddenly taken ill or passed out or something?
Oh, that'd be terrible. I mean, the train would be out of control. It would just run away.
All right, well, let's see what happens. Go on then, Ray. Oh, look, he's come out.
What's going on? Hey. That's amazing. It's slowing down. What's happening?
You can see that the train will come to a safe stop. That's because this train, like all trains, is fitted with a rather clever safety device. All right, Ray, show us how. You see, it's got something that's called, rather gruesomely, a dead man's handle. As long as Ray's got his hand on that handle, the train will work. The moment Ray lets go of the lever, it cuts power to the motors and the train will roll to a safe stop. And that's how a dead man can stop a train, with a dead man's handle.
Fantastic.
Oh, Fred, look! I've got to have a go at one of these. Have you got one of those old pennies?
I've had it since 1941, but go on.
Yes. Oh.
Any good?
No, Fred. It's what the butler didn't see.
Typical.
Now, how did a horse become the very first movie star? Well, just over 100 years ago, horse racing was extremely popular, and the raging debate or question of the day was to how a horse managed to gallop. The question was, when a horse gallops, does it have 1, 2, 3 or 4 legs off the ground at any one time?
In fact, they travel so fast, it's impossible to know, surely.
Well, it was an English photographer called Muybridge who solved the problem, and he created the very first photographic shutter. And what he did was, when he pressed the button, that would happen. Saw the flash of light being able to go through the lens there? This is how it worked. When the camera was in the off position, it was just like that. The lens would be covered. When he released the shutter, this would come down to allow a flash of light through to the plate, and then it would close again. So he would effectively freeze a frame.
But back to basics, how did that make a horse famous?
Well, he managed to win the prize because this is the photograph he got. This is a horse galloping. There we can see all 4 legs are off the ground at any one time.
But what about the how? How did that make a horse a movie star?
Well, I'd like to enlist your help to give you the answer to that. So if you'd like to come this way.
Don't like the sound of this.
Well, nowadays, to take a movie, what you'd have is one camera, a movie camera, which would take a series of photographs or frames in quick succession to give you the movie. But what Muybridge did was he had lots of cameras, each taking 1 photograph. And each one would be triggered by a tripwire. Now, we've set up exactly what Muybridge did here on the how-to racing course. These are the cameras. The tripwires would be triggered as the horse goes through, thus giving us a movie. Now, to run the course, we have the how-to pedigree racehorse, Desert Dime Top.
We're not
Come
happy
along.
about this, I'm going to say that.
Desert Dime Top.
Got yourself a reel.
And are you ready? Are you ready?
Legs
and they're off.
2, 3.
Oh, and they're off. Go to the first one. Oh, they're doing that so well. Oh, yes. And the back end's looking pretty dicey, pretty dodgy. Go, Dobbin, go. Whoa. Whoa. And what Muybridge had created, although he didn't realise it, by putting the series of photographs together, he had the very first movie.
How?
Do you know, Gareth, that's the most uncomfortable thing I've ever done.
It was all right for you. You were the front end of the horse.
You're never happy, are you? Anyway, that's how Hal went to the seaside.
And that's how for now.
What a lovely time.